Jack Reynolds was pinned against the jagged hull of his downed spacecraft, his arms wrapped tightly around Max, his German shepherd, as chunks of smoldering metal rained down from the ceiling. "Stay down, buddy," Jack muttered through clenched teeth, the heat making his lungs feel like they were on fire. Max whimpered softly but stayed still, his tail tucked between his legs. Outside the wrecked ship, a group of tall, silver-skinned aliens with elongated limbs and sharp, angular features stood in a precise formation, watching. The Ulari. Jack had heard of them before, logical, efficient, cold as a winter gale. They didn't believe in emotional displays or attachments, especially when it came to what they called lesser organisms. Their society revolved around reason, calculation, and the pursuit of progress. To them, a creature like Max wasn't a companion. He was just an asset, or worse, a liability. One of the Ulari stepped forward, his dark eyes glinting under the harsh planetary sun. "Human Reynolds," he said in a voice that was almost mechanical in its precision. "Why do you protect the beast? It is neither valuable nor essential to your survival. Your behavior lacks logic." Jack shifted slightly to look at the alien, still keeping his body between Max and the unstable wreckage above. "First of all," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "his name is Max, not Beast. Secondly, you don't leave family behind. Ever." The Ulari exchanged glances, their expressions inscrutable. Their leader, Vrex, stepped closer, his movements as fluid and deliberate as a machine's. "Family? This creature is not of your species. It does not possess significant intelligence or the ability to contribute to your survival. By our calculations, you are jeopardizing your own life for no discernible gain." Jack let out a bitter laugh. "You guys don't do pets, huh?" Figures. He glanced down at Max, who was staring up at him with wide, trusting eyes. "Look, where I come from, a dog like Max isn't just a creature, he's loyal. He'd risk his life for me without a second thought. That's what family does. You don't just abandon them because it's inconvenient." Vrex's brow furrowed slightly, a rare display of emotion for an Ulari. "You risk yourself for loyalty? An abstract concept tied to an inferior life form? This is madness." "Welcome to humanity," Jack said, his tone defiant. The Ulari seemed genuinely baffled. They began to murmur among themselves in their strange, buzzing language, their sharp-featured faces betraying a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Jack could tell they were trying to process what they had just witnessed and failing spectacularly. "Enough," Rex said, silencing the others with a wave of his hand. He turned back to Jack, his dark eyes narrowing. "You will explain this. Loyalty. It is unlike anything we have observed in any species. Your actions defy logic, yet they appear to hold significance to you." Jack sighed and shifted his position again, wincing as a sharp piece of debris scraped his shoulder. "Look, I don't know how to explain it to you guys. Max isn't just some animal. He's been with me through thick and thin. He's saved my life more times than I can count. And yeah, maybe he doesn't talk or calculate hyperspace trajectories. But he's got heart. He's got loyalty. And that matters." Rex tilted his head, as if trying to decipher a particularly complex equation. "Loyalty. You equate this concept with value despite its lack of measurable utility. Fascinating." Jack smirked. "You guys really don't get it, do you? Max isn't just valuable to me because of what he can do. He's valuable because of what he is. He's my friend, my partner, my family." The Ulari leader fell silent, his gaze fixed on Jack and Max. Behind him, the other aliens continued to murmur, their confusion evident. To them, Jack's actions were incomprehensible. They had never seen anything like it. But as the moments passed, something shifted in Vrex's expression. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a glimmer of understanding, or at least the beginnings of it. "You prioritize loyalty over survival," he said slowly, as if testing the words. "You risk your life for a bond that transcends logic. Perhaps. There is more to your species than we initially perceived." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Was that a compliment? From an Ulari? I didn't think you guys were capable of those." Vrex ignored the jab, his gaze still fixed on Max. "This behavior is unique. It warrants further study. Perhaps there is merit in examining the value of loyalty, even if it defies our understanding of efficiency and logic." Jack shrugged. "Hey, you do you. Just don't expect me to start acting like a robot anytime soon." Vrex's lips twitched and almost smiled, though it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He turned to his subordinates and barked an order in their strange, buzzing language. The other Ulari moved forward, their movements precise and synchronized, and began to clear the debris around Jack and Max. You and your family member will be escorted to safety, Vrex said. In return, you will provide us with further insight into this concept of loyalty. It may hold value we have yet to comprehend. Jack nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Deal. But just so you know, Max doesn't work for free. He's going to need some snacks after this. Vrex frowned, clearly not understanding the joke, but Jack didn't care. He glanced down at Max, giving the dog a reassuring pat on the head. Looks like we're going to be okay, buddy, he said softly. Max wagged his tail, his trust in Jack unwavering. As the Ulari cleared the last of the debris and helped Jack to his feet, Vrex watched them closely, his expression thoughtful. For the first time, he began to wonder if there was more to humanity than their apparent chaos and illogical tendencies. Perhaps, he thought, there was something worth learning from these strange, emotional creatures after all. Zikta's elongated fingers hovered inches above Max's fur, their silvered skin refracting the sterile light of the Ulari lab. Max sat still on the examination table, his head tilted at an angle that suggested he wasn't sure whether to be curious or annoyed. Jack stood a few feet away, arms crossed, an expression of barely restrained skepticism plastered across his face. Your creature, Zikta started, her words as clipped as the precision instruments beside her, is entirely biological. No enhancements, no implants, no evidence of sentience beyond base survival instincts. Remarkably unremarkable. Wow, Jack replied, his voice heavy with sarcasm. Nothing like calling my best friend remarkably unremarkable really warms the heart. Heart temperature is irrelevant, Zikta responded without missing a beat, her black eyes narrowing as she peered down at Max. What remains perplexing, Human Reynolds, is your attachment. By all accounts, this creature lacks the capabilities that would justify your emotional investment. It is no more advanced than some of the vermin on our agricultural outposts. Jack bristled but forced himself to take a deep breath. First off, stop calling him creature, his name is Max. Second, you're wrong. Max isn't some dumb animal, he's saved my life more times than I can count. Zikta straightened, her spindly frame towering over Jack, though he didn't flinch under her gaze. Please elaborate on these alleged life-saving instances. Jack glanced at Max, who was now licking his paw with a nonchalance that felt almost performative. All right, let's start with the camping trip, Jack began, leaning back against the wall of the lab. A couple of years ago, I decided I needed some off-the-grid time. Just me, Max, and the wilderness. No tech, no distractions. It was supposed to be a weekend of peace and quiet. That was, of course, until I fell into a ravine. Zikta stiffened slightly, her neck craning forward. Define ravine. A big crack in the ground, Jack explained, gesturing vaguely with his hands. I was climbing over some rocks, lost my footing, and bam, down I went. Sprained my ankle, couldn't climb out, and my communicator was back at the campsite. I was stuck, and it was getting dark. That's when Max jumped into action. The Ulari scientist tilted her head, her expression unreadable. What action could this biologically unenhanced organism possibly take to remedy such circumstances? Jack smirked. He went back to the campsite, grabbed my sleeping bag in his teeth, and dragged it all the way to me. Then he stayed with me all night, keeping me warm so I didn't freeze to death. Next morning, he found a way back to the trail and barked until some hikers showed up to help. Zikta's eyes flickered with something that might have been skepticism, though it was hard to tell. This anecdote suggests the creature exhibited behavior driven by its bond to you. However, it does not explain why you reciprocate such loyalty. It remains illogical. Of course it's illogical, Jack shot back. That's what makes it human. You don't love something because it's useful. You love it because it's there for you when it counts. Max didn't have to stay with me that night. He could have left me there and gone off to chase squirrels or whatever. But he didn't. He chose to help me, and that's why I'd do the same for him. Zikta stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Fascinating, she murmured, almost to herself. This concept of reciprocal loyalty defies traditional metrics of value. Yeah, well, Jack said, shrugging. Not everything in life fits into neat little boxes. You'd be surprised how much people, well, humans are willing to do for the things they care about, even if it doesn't make sense. Before Zikta could respond, the floor beneath them trembled, a low rumble reverberating through the lab. Max's ears perked up, and a low growl escaped his throat. Jack straightened, his instincts kicking in immediately. What the hell was that, he asked, his voice sharp. A voice crackled over the lab's intercom, delivering a rapid string of Ulari words that Jack couldn't understand. Whatever was being said made Zicta's silvery skin take on a faintly iridescent sheen, a sign of alarm, Jack guessed. There has been an increase in seismic activity, Zicta said, her tone clipped and efficient. The planetary crust is destabilizing. Evacuation protocols are now in effect. Wait, what? Jack exclaimed. You're telling me this whole planet's about to blow? Not blow, Zicta corrected. Collapse. The tectonic instability has reached a critical threshold. We must leave immediately. The room trembled again, this time more violently, sending a tray of instruments clattering to the floor. Max barked sharply, his muscles tensing as he looked to Jack for direction. All right, buddy, Jack said, kneeling down to pat Max on the head. We're getting out of here. But as the evacuation alarms blared and the lab descended into chaos, a sudden jolt knocked Jack off balance. When he scrambled to his feet, Max was gone. Max, Jack called, his voice rising in panic. Max. Zicta grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so wiry. We must go. The evacuation vessels are departing. There is no time. I'm not leaving without him, Jack shouted, wrenching his arm free. Human Reynolds, Zicta said, her tone sharp. The probability of locating your creature in this chaos is negligible. Prioritize your own survival. Jack glared at her, his jaw set in determination. You don't get it, do you? He'd never leave me behind, so I'm not leaving him. End of story. Zicta hesitated, her usually unshakable logic faltering in the face of Jack's resolve. This is irrational, she said, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. Welcome to humanity, Jack shot back before taking off down the corridor, his voice echoing as he called out for Max. Zicta watched him go, her mind racing. For beings like the Ulari, who valued efficiency above all else, Jack's actions were incomprehensible. And yet, as illogical as it seemed, there was something about his determination that struck a chord deep within her. Fascinating, she muttered again before turning to follow. Meanwhile, Jack barreled through the crumbling facility, his heart pounding as he shouted Max's name. He ignored the growing tremors, the wailing alarms, the shouts of fleeing Ulari. All that mattered was finding his dog. When he finally spotted Max trapped beneath a fallen beam in a corner of the lab, Jack's relief was so overwhelming it almost knocked him off his feet. Hang on, buddy, he said, rushing to free him. As he lifted the beam, Max wriggled free and immediately jumped up to lick Jack's face, his tail wagging furiously despite the chaos around them. Good boy, Jack said, his voice trembling with emotion. Let's get out of here. As they made their way back to the evacuation zone, Jack caught sight of Zicta waiting near the exit, her expression unreadable. You found him, she said simply. Of course I did, Jack replied, shooting her a defiant look. Zicta said nothing, but as they boarded the evacuation vessel together, she found herself reevaluating everything she thought she knew about value, logic, and loyalty. The ground beneath Jack's feet cracked with a deafening roar, sending up a plume of dust that stung his eyes and clung to his throat. He stumbled but didn't stop, his boots slipping against the unstable terrain as he pushed forward. Max, he yelled again, his voice hoarse. All he could hear in response was the screeching grind of shifting tectonic plates and the alarming creak of the planet coming apart at the seams. Far above him, aboard the Ulari ship orbiting the planet, a group of observers watched his frantic progress with a mix of confusion and unease. Their sleek, silver forms shimmered faintly under the dim cabin lights as they argued in their sharp, buzzing language. This is illogical, one of them hissed, her voice tinged with exasperation. The human risks self-termination for a lower organism companion. He must be retrieved before he compromises his viability. Intervention would be inefficient, another countered, his tone calm but dismissive. The creature's loss is irrelevant. The human's survival probability decreases with every moment he delays. The behavior itself is what matters, Rex said, his voice cutting through the debate. He stood at the center of the group, his dark eyes fixed on the screen displaying Jack's desperate search. We study them for their unpredictability, their irrationality. This act embodies those traits. To ignore it would be a missed opportunity. He is jeopardizing himself, the first Ulari argued. How can we justify observing such wastefulness? And yet Vrex replied, his voice softer now, "Does it not intrigue you? He acts on nothing but his bond to the other creature. No logic, no calculation, only something else." A silence fell over the group as the others exchanged wary glances. The Ulari prided themselves on their precision, their ability to dissect and analyze any phenomenon with cold, unflinching rationality. Yet here was something they could not chart on a graph or quantify with equations. Vrex could feel their discomfort, their reluctance to admit that something so alien to them could hold value. Finally, Vrex spoke again. "Assemble a team," he ordered. "We will assist him." The dissent was immediate, a flurry of protests rising from the group. "Intervention contradicts our principles. We cannot compromise our objectivity. This serves no purpose beyond sentimentality." "Enough," Vrex said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "The purpose is to understand, and to understand we must act." Jack's hands were bleeding by the time he reached the source of Max's faint bark. It had taken every ounce of strength and focus to navigate the crumbling landscape, leaping over chasms, dodging falling debris, and clawing his way through the dense dust clouds that obscured his vision. But now, as he knelt beside the pile of rubble pinning Max's hind legs, the pain in his body faded into the background. All that mattered was freeing his dog. "Hang on, boy," he muttered, his voice shaking. Max wagged his tail weakly, his muzzle resting on the ground as he watched Jack with those same trusting eyes that had seen them through countless scraps before. Jack gritted his teeth and dug his hands under the largest chunk of debris, ignoring the sharp edges that bit into his palms. He heaved with everything he had, his muscles screaming in protest. The rubble shifted slightly, but not enough. Sweat dripped into his eyes as he tried again and again, but it was no use. The beam was too heavy, and his body was too spent. "Damn it," he shouted, slamming a fist into the ground. He leaned over Max, running a trembling hand through the dog's fur. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so damn sorry." A shadow fell over him, and Jack looked up to see a familiar silver figure standing above him. Vrex. Behind him, a small team of Ulari emerged from the swirling dust, their movements as precise and deliberate as ever. "What are you doing here?" Jack demanded, his voice rough with exhaustion and disbelief. "I thought you people didn't do rescue missions." Vrex tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "Your actions compelled reconsideration," he said simply. He glanced at the rubble pinning Max. "This task exceeds your capabilities. Allow us." Jack hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Please, just be careful with him." Rex gestured to his team, who moved into position with practiced efficiency. Despite their earlier objections, the Ulari worked together seamlessly, lifting the debris with their strange, gravity-defying tools. Within moments, Max was free. The dog scrambled to his feet, limping slightly but otherwise unharmed. He immediately pressed against Jack, his tail wagging furiously as if to say, "I knew you'd come." Jack wrapped his arms around him, burying his face in Max's fur as relief crashed over him like a tidal wave. "Thank you," he said hoarsely, looking up at Vrex. I don't know how to repay you." Vrex studied him for a long moment before replying. "Repayment is unnecessary. Your actions have provided insight." Jack pushed himself to his feet, still holding on to Max. "Insight into what?" Vrex hesitated, searching for the right words. "Loyalty," he said finally, "sacrifice. These concepts are foreign to us, illogical. Yet they possess a power we cannot ignore." Jack raised an eyebrow. "So what? You're suddenly interested in feelings now." "Not feelings," Rex corrected. "Connections. Bonds. They appear to drive your species in ways that defy reason, yet produce results that cannot be dismissed." Jack snorted. "Yeah, well, welcome to humanity. We're messy, we're stubborn, and we don't always make sense. But when we care about something, really care about it, we don't back down. Not ever." Vrex's dark eyes seemed to soften just a fraction. "This resolve. It is unfamiliar. Yet I find myself compelled by it." Jack chuckled, though it came out more as a wheeze. "Don't worry, it grows on you. Like Max here. He's not just a dog, he's family." Vrex glanced at Max, who had settled at Jack's feet, panting contentedly despite the chaos still unfolding around them. "Family," Vrex repeated, the words sounding strange on his tongue. A bond not dictated by necessity or logic, merely chosen. Exactly, Jack said. And that's why it's worth fighting for. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Around them, the planet continued to crumble, the ground trembling and the air thick with dust and heat. But within that small bubble of understanding, something shifted. Finally, Vrex turned to his team. Return to the evacuation vessel, he ordered. Ensure their safe passage. As the Ulari moved to comply, Jack looked at Vrex with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. Why did you do it? He asked. Come down here, I mean. It couldn't have been just to watch me make a fool of myself. Vrex's gaze lingered on Jack and Max for a moment longer before he replied. Perhaps. I wish to understand what compels you to risk everything for what others might deem insignificant. Jack smirked. And? You figure it out. Vrex's lips twitched, almost imperceptibly. Not entirely, but perhaps understanding is not always required. Sometimes observing is enough. Jack nodded, the weight of the moment settling over him. Well, for what it's worth. Thanks, you didn't have to help, but you did. That means something. Vrex inclined his head slightly, an almost human gesture that felt oddly fitting. Perhaps it does. Safely aboard the Ulari ship, Jack slumped into one of the oddly contoured chairs in the recovery bay, his legs finally giving out beneath him. Max, curled up at his feet, let out a contented huff and promptly closed his eyes, his tail thumping once against the floor before going still. Jack reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears, his fingers moving automatically as exhaustion began to take hold. The adrenaline had burned off, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that was both physical and emotional. But Max was safe. And that was all that mattered. Across the room, a group of Ulari stood clustered near the observation window, their metallic figures silhouetted against the cold glow of the planet below. The tremors had subsided now that they were safely in orbit, but the surface was a different story. Churning clouds of dust and ash rose from ruptures in the crust, a stark reminder of how close they'd all come to being swallowed by the planet's collapse. Jack didn't envy the cleanup teams who'd eventually be sent to assess the damage, assuming the Ulari even bothered. Vrex broke away from the group and approached Jack, his long strides noiseless on the smooth floor. Though his expression was as unreadable as always, there was something in his posture that seemed less rigid, as though some of the Ulari's infamous detachment had softened. Your injuries have been stabilized, Vrex said, his voice even. The medical team will continue monitoring for complications. Thanks, Doc, Jack replied, his tone dry. Nice to know I'm not going to keel over just yet. He sat up straighter, wincing as his bruised ribs protested the movement. What about Max? They didn't poke him with anything weird, did they? Vrex tilted his head slightly. The canine sustained minor abrasions but is otherwise unharmed. No. Poking was required. Good, Jack said, his hand drifting absently to rest on Max's flank. He's had enough excitement for one day. Vrex remained silent for a moment, his dark eyes flicking between Jack and Max as though cataloging details for later analysis. When he finally spoke, his tone held an unfamiliar weight. Your actions on the surface were unexpected. Jack raised an eyebrow. What, you mean running back into a death trap for my dog? Yeah, well, that's kind of my thing, reckless heroics and all that. It was not reckless, Vrex replied, his voice unusually measured. It was deliberate. Purposeful. You prioritized the life of the canine over your own survival. This behavior contradicts the principles of efficiency and self-preservation. Jack leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. You're not wrong. But like I keep telling you, not everything has to make sense. Sometimes you just do what feels right. Vrex's gaze didn't waver, but there was a subtle shift in his expression, not quite curiosity, but something close. Zikta has proposed further study of human emotional bonds, he said. She believes they represent an untapped dimension of cooperative behavior. Wow, Jack said, his smirk widening. Didn't know I was going to end up being the poster boy for intergalactic friendship. You going to put me and Max in some kind of lab? Unnecessary, Vrex replied. Your actions speak sufficiently. They challenge our understanding of value and purpose. Already perspectives among the Ulari have begun to shift. Jack blinked, caught off guard by the admission. Wait, you mean? You guys actually learned something from all this? Vrex inclined his head slightly. Loyalty, as you define it, is an unfamiliar but compelling concept. It appears to provide resilience in ways that defy logical parameters. Your bond with the canine exemplifies this resilience. Jack's smirk softened into a genuine smile. Well, look at that. The Ulari are learning how to feel. Next thing you know, you'll be adopting stray cats. Rex ignored the jab, though the faintest flicker of amusement might have crossed his face. The value of such bonds remains difficult to quantify. However, they are not without merit. Jack couldn't help but laugh, though it was more out of relief than anything else. I'll take that as a compliment. And for what it's worth, you guys didn't do too bad yourselves. I mean, you didn't have to come back for us, but you did. Guess loyalty isn't so foreign to you after all. Rex regarded him silently for a moment before replying. Perhaps? Before Jack could respond, the door to the recovery base slid open, and Zikta stepped inside, her movements as precise as ever. She held a sleek data tablet in one hand, her elongated fingers tapping rapidly across its surface as she approached. Human Reynolds, she began without preamble. We are prepared to assist in your return to Earth. However, it will require coordination with your planetary authorities, which may introduce delays. Jack nodded, relief washing over him. That's fine. I'll take delays over dying on a collapsing rock any day. Zikta's gaze shifted to Max, who was now sprawled on the floor with one paw draped lazily over Jack's boot. The canine will accompany you. Jack frowned, his protective instincts flaring. Of course he will. What kind of question is that? I merely observe, Zikta said, her tone as neutral as ever. The canine's presence has altered the perceptions of some among us. Previously regarded as a lesser lifeform, its role in your survival has prompted reconsideration. Jack arched an eyebrow. So what, you guys are finally realizing that dogs are awesome? Took you long enough. Zikta didn't respond, but the faintest hint of a frown crossed her angular features, a rare display of emotion that didn't go unnoticed. Jack decided to take it as a win. As Zikta returned to her duties, Rex stepped closer, his expression unusually contemplative. Before you depart, he began, I have a request. Jack tilted his head, intrigued. A request? From you? This should be good. Rex hesitated, a rare pause that spoke volumes. Teach us. Jack blinked. Teach you what? Loyalty, Rex said simply. The depth and strength of your bond with the canine has challenged many of our assumptions. If such bonds hold the potential to enhance cooperation and resilience, we wish to understand them. Jack stared at him for a moment, then let out a soft chuckle. All right, sure. Lesson 1, never underestimate a man and his dog. He reached down to ruffle Max's fur, the gesture as natural as breathing. We're a package deal, you know. You mess with one of us, you mess with both. Rex nodded, his dark eyes glinting with something that might have been respect. A lesson worth remembering. As the Ulari prepared Jack and Max for their journey home, the once cold and detached aliens found themselves viewing the pair in a new light. What had begun as a mere curiosity had grown into something more, a recognition of the values that defined humanity, even when they didn't align with logic or efficiency. For Jack, it was a small victory. For the Ulari, it was the beginning of a transformation. And for Max, it was just another day by his best friend's side.